Okay, I'm going to break this drawing down into steps that are way easier to follow than you might imagine, so that you can have a go, create this, and amaze yourself. Okay, so as I explained in the intro, I'm going to break this down into steps so that you learn about the painting process and techniques, as well as about the tools within the app I'm using, Procreate. But that isn't to say you couldn't use a different app on a different tablet and still follow along. Having said that, within the app Procreate, I'm using their default A4 canvas, which is 297 by 210 millimeters at 300 dpi. And then also in terms of the color profile, I'm using their sRGB profile, the one that ends in 2.1. In addition to this, please just bear in mind that the camera that I'm using does tend to distort the colors slightly, but as long as you're using the same color profile and the color codes that I provide, then you will be creating the same colors that I am, even if they look a bit different. In terms of the brushes, I'm going to be using the brushes that come free with the app by default, and they are within inking. I'm going to use the studio pen and the dry ink. Within airbrushing, I'm going to be using the soft brush, the medium brush, and the medium hard brush probably. Within charcoals, I'll be using the burnt tree brush. Within elements, the clouds brush. Within vintage, the rad brush. And within luminance, the light pen. And then last of all, within organic, I'll probably have a go at the rainforest brush and the snow gum brush. Now, I may experiment with lots of different brushes, but don't be put off by that. It's only because we're trying to create different effects of foliage. And then within the colors, well, I've already pre-selected a color palette for this image. And each of the colors, if you go to the value section, has what we call a hexadecimal code associated with it. And each of these codes is listed down in the video description. You just need to copy and paste them into this box one at a time and press enter. The color will appear up here, and then you can tap it into a color palette that you create of your own. Or alternatively, next to the codes in the description is a link that takes you to my Patreon page where you can download the color file for free to save you some time. And Patreon is also the place that you can support this channel. It really has enabled me to push forward as a channel and continue doing what I do here. And it's also a place where you can gain access to exclusive content, such as extended versions of these tutorials. I'd like to say a massive thank you to those people who do support me over at Patreon. It really does make a huge difference. So thank you so much. And with all of that said and done, we're going to get started. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm going to go to the first color on the top row. I'm going to drag from the color circle into the canvas area and release, and that flood fills the whole canvas. I'm going to go to our layers and create a new layer, layer 2. I'm going to go to the second color on the top row. We're going to go to the airbrushing soft brush, and we're going to put the size about 25% and 100% opacity, and then not quite at the very top, but somewhere just a little bit downwards from there, so that we retain a little band at the top of the original color. Adjustments, Gaussian blur, and then we can blur that in to about the 40%, and then deselect. We're going to add some suggestions of cloud and the sun to that sky, but not just yet. We'll do that a little bit later. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 3. Go to my colors. I'm going to use the third color on the top row. I'm going to go in with the airbrushing medium hard brush, and I'm going to initially use this just to set the horizon line for this image. So I'm going to put it at 1% size, maybe 50% strength. We won't see this by the time that we've added other elements anyway. And I want this to be just a little bit upwards from the halfway, and draw a line across. And you can see I've really not made any effort to keep it a straight line, because when I held it at the other end, then it snapped to a straight line. Now we are after the horizontal line, which is difficult to gauge, but if you go for something that is clearly nowhere near horizontal, doesn't matter, hold it with your other hand, put your finger down, and then it snaps to that exactly horizontal line for you, which is really useful. It takes all the doubt out of the equation. Now I'm going to keep that horizon line as a separate layer. I'm going to create a new layer, layer 4. I'm going to stick with the medium hard brush with an airbrushing. I'm also going to stick with that third color on the top row. I'm going to go for 3% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just going to introduce from this outer edge kind of wobbly line some distant mountains that don't go too high in this scene, they don't really go high up there, only about a third of the way up of this upper area. And then I'll just restate that horizon line for the sake of doing this. Hold it, and drag into that area, and it should flood fill for us. Any little anomalies, just go in there and close them down, like so. Still with the medium hard brush. Then we're going to go to the fourth colour on the top row. And about 2/3 of the way up, we're just going to start a line that cuts down here. We're going to bring it down to, well, almost the halfway. Maybe you could have that kind of rumbling on a little bit further, and that's fine. Draw a line from that horizon line to here. Hold it until it snaps. Then you can just drag into that area, flood fill it, close any little anomalies, like so. We'll keep all of these mountain sections on different layers, so we'll create a new layer again, layer 6. And from somewhere in this region, we're just going to create another kind of mountain. It just cuts through, again, just maybe from the outer edge, zoom it this way, hold, just close that loop, and then drag to flood fill. Okay, we're going to create another layer, layer 7. Going to stick with the medium brush with an airbrushing. I'm going to move along to the 5th colour on the top row. 3% size, 100% opacity, and we're just going to restate the horizon line with this colour. All the way across, hold it, snap. Then just a little bit down from here, I'm just going to introduce a kind of wobbly line. So that it cuts over there. And I'm going to allow this to, again, just rumble along here a little bit. Then I'm going to drag, fill in that space. If you want to add any other little bumps and almost like tree shapes and textures in the distance here. Nothing major. Something like this. I'm then going to go to that layer, tap on it and put on the alpha lock. And you can see a little checkerboard design, which means that anything that we add within that layer now, so let's go for a really alternative colour so you can see it, is going to be contained in that shape, which is really useful. We're not going to go for that colour though. We're going to go for the 6th colour on the top row, which is just a hint more towards the green. And we'll switch to the soft brush with an airbrushing. We'll put it down, 2% size and maybe 60% strength. And then we're just going to tap in just in a kind of sideways movement, just to create some sense of variation. Maybe there's some grass in the distant areas, and then obviously there's going to be blocks of trees and other features. We're just kind of like sideways building in. I'll just zoom in so you can see it a little bit more clearly. It's only going to be a subtle kind of suggestion of it, so we don't need to be overly detailed with it. Maybe just turn it down a little bit lower on that 2%, and we can just be a bit more controlled and refined. Again, it doesn't need a great deal of time and attention spent to it. If you want to go back to the 5th colour, restate some of these darker sections. If you're not quite happy, you've got to try and imagine blocks of trees and things like that. Not always easy to quite visualize, but don't worry about it at this stage. It will kind of just pull together a little bit later on. These kind of background textures just have a habit of working in the context with everything else, so you don't need to worry too much about them. I wouldn't put the green along that very top edge though, because if it were trees up in that area, then the darker colour would represent the trees, and this lighter colour is the grass on the ground level, obviously. Okay, I'm going to create a new layer, layer 8. And on this layer, we'll go to the medium brush with an airbrushing. We'll put it at 2% size, 100% opacity, and we'll just restate the horizon line to zoom out. Point there, all the way to there. Hold it until it snaps, and then you've got your horizon line again. And we're not going to see much of this, but I'm just going to do a kind of slightly undulating section of land here, all the way across. Drag to fill it in, like so. And we're probably going to notice the middle section of this most. And I'm going to go in with the organic rainforest brush, reset it. The default settings for this brush at this point is going to be just right. We'll put it down to 2% size, 100% opacity, and zoom in. And then, in fact, even lower on that percentage, let's put it down to 1%. We're just going to have some little shapes that stick up, trees. Textures here, things that stick up. We'll go back here and we can do it along Some going to be taller, some shorter, just kind of like upwards movement with these, and just kind of move across and kind of scribble it in, really. Doesn't require a great deal of precision. And again, much of this is going to be obscured by an even closer section anyway, so you don't need to go all the way across. I mean, you can do if it's quite an enjoyable thing to do. Maybe some of it will be revealed through, so maybe just take it all the way across on this side, like that. Back to our layers, create a new layer, layer 9, and then we're going to move along. We're going to go to the 8th color on the top row, and this time we're going to split it, so we're going to have two sections. They're going to be slightly lower than the horizon line, so where we're going to judge it from, or we can put a point, so we'll stay on the, in fact no, we'll go to the airbrushing medium brush again. 2% size, 100% opacity, and we want a section in the center where we have a gap, so we're perhaps going to come to about this point, maybe a third, touch more than a third across, maybe across here, maybe not quite as far, so it's not completely symmetrical. Once you put those little points, we can go from there across to the edge, and you notice I'm doing it slightly underneath that horizon line, there to there, and we'll do something similar here. So just all the way across, hold it so it snaps, and again it's just slightly underneath that horizon line, so it's noticeably closer to us. I'm going to zoom in, and then just from that point I'm going to create a slight bit of land, mainly just to cover up that gap really. It goes backwards this way. Rotate the canvas if it's easier to use it that way. I often kind of rotate the canvas just because I find it easier to do straight lines. If I'm doing a line across here, I find that really awkward to do it like that. I find it much easier when I rotate it, so it fits the natural kind of movement of my hand, like this. Now those little anomalies there, go in the eraser, it doesn't matter what. Put the medium brush with an airbrushing, 1% size, 100% opacity, just get rid of that. Then we're going to return to the organic rainforest brush, still with this colour, 1% size, 100% opacity, and I'm just going to tap in some textures. I'm creating more kind of really nice tree textures. Some shorter, some taller, some thinner, some wider. Create some variation. I think it's more naturalistic, more believable when there's a variation. We also kind of want to leave some of these little suggestions of gaps that cut through. I think it makes sense. Some taller ones. Like I was saying before, maybe bits along here are still going to be revealed. That layer behind might just be visible in one or two places. But the ones that are slightly closer to us are going to be kind of taller, more dramatic. Maybe a whole section here that's just taller. Let's move along. But then it could undulate down. You decide what works best for you. And then we'll go over to this side, and well, maybe it comes low down here, but then maybe it rises up, and there's a big section. Perhaps we could even put the brush size up to 2%, tap it in, allows us to be just a bit faster, fill in more areas more quickly, tap it in, circle it in, variations of kind of technique of applying it. Like so. Now we've got two areas of land now that just come forward a little bit more. Again, on that layer, I'm going to tap on layer 9, put on the alpha lock. I'm going to go in with the 9th color, which is more of an obvious green. Well, it isn't really, but it has a hint more green when you look at it in context with everything else. And I'm going to put it at low on the 2% size, 100% opacity. And then just in this kind of lower section, I'm going to tap in some suggestions of kind of green, slightly lower down. Maybe there's grass down there. So we have trees, we have grass. And again, it's subtle, so you don't really need to actually go into a huge amount of detail for it. And just move that along. Maybe it could rise up a little bit taller in some areas for the grass, and then down again. And it's quite a small detail, but it can be quite effective. Now I'm going to go back to the second colour on the top row. I'm going to go back to my other layers. I'm going to go initially for layer 4, and I'm going to go in with the airbrushing soft brush. I'm going to put it at 5% size, and I'm going to put it quite low, maybe 10% strength. And then just on this side we're only dealing with this section initially, maybe just along that top edge. I can just reduce the impact of it, soften it near the top, make it a bit more subtle. Then I can go to layer 5 near the bottom here. Whoops, we'll go and put the alpha lock on that layer, in fact, just in this bottom area where it kind of joins in the center. Just soften that in, and also kind of along this edge, or lower down, certainly down here, and then soften it in here so it really becomes much more faint the way it actually joins. That works better. We'll go up to layer 6, this one, tap on it, put on the alpha lock again, and just slightly subdue it at this side. If I go and turn the alpha lock off, go back to my colors, 4th color, medium hard brush, 3% size, but put it really quite low at 20% strength. And I think I could just introduce another layer in there, quite subtle, but it just adds a little bit more complexity in terms of layers. Go on to layer 6 now, tap on it and put on the alpha lock, and I'm going to move along to the 5th color, 3% size, maybe 10% strength. And I'm just going to introduce maybe another layer in here. Oops, just move that along, and then, well, just kind of color underneath it. Try to do it in one movement, because the more you go over this, the more it doubles up that kind of strength, which I don't mind. Maybe in the top section you can just go over it a few times, introduce a bit more texture, a bit more going on. Perhaps in that distant area it looks a little bit flat, so with a bit more just scribbled in there, it's really subtle, but just makes it a bit more interesting. And same with this mountain over here. So we've got layer 5. Let's go back to the alpha lock is still on. So just tap in bits of this color, just suggestions of texture, really very little, and it does quite a lot. Just looking at the overall thing, maybe on layer 9, I'm going to go to that and turn off the alpha lock. I'm going to go to the transform, the freeform, and just from the top, pull it upwards a little bit. I think I want them to be a bit more dramatic, eat into that scene a little bit more. I don't want them to go too far. I want them still to be below that kind of edge here. You can see I've increased the size of them, and I think that's actually working better. I prefer that a little bit more. And I'm just going to look at the layer there, which was layer 8. Tap on that, transform, freeform, and just pull that up a little bit more as well. And again, I think that works better. I'm going to go to the top layer and create a new layer, layer 10. I'm going to change the blend mode from normal by scrolling down to add. And you'll see it change from a little n to a little a. I'm going to go for the 9th color on the middle row, this really vibrant orange. I'm going in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 80% size and 2% opacity, so super subtle really. And just in this kind of center area, about here, 4 taps. Then going to reduce the size to maybe 40%. Couple of taps. Reduce it down to 20%. Couple of taps. 10%. Maybe 3 or 4 taps. I'm then going to go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just blur it in slightly. Not too much, maybe about 15%. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer. Again, tap on the N, scroll down to the add. I'm going to go in with the yellow color, so the 8th color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the medium hard brush with an airbrushing, 4% size and 100% opacity. And again, we're just going for the middle section. Tap it a few times till you get a nice circle. Adjustments, bloom, slide it all the way across so you get, again, a really vibrant glow. Then we go back to the soft brush with an airbrushing, 10% size, again only 2% opacity, and then just in that area, 3 or 4 taps. And repeating similar to what we just did with the other layer, 15% size, 3 taps, and then a bit bigger now, so maybe 25%. Just a couple of taps. And that will do for this sun, but we're going to add some kind of cloud effects in and around this scene. Okay, I'm going to go back to layer 3, which is underneath layer 4, and create a new layer there. So layer 12 is all the way down here. Tap on the N, scroll down to make it an add blend mode. I'm going to go in with the elements clouds brush, And I'm going to go in for this really rich brown colour, the 10th colour on the middle row. 8% size, 40% strength. And I'm just starting to bring some of this cloud in to this area from over here. Maybe some more over in this area. Circle it in. Just suggestions of it to begin with. Then I'm going to go back to layer 4 and I'm going to go back in with that third colour and the airbrushing soft brush, 2% size, 15% strength. And I want to start bringing some darker suggestions into this cloud area too. So in the center of some of these brighter shapes, we're just having a sense that this cloud has some bulk and maybe just starts to blur in with some of these mountain areas. It becomes less defined what's cloud, what's kind of mountain areas. Again, just shut down some of this cloud, give it a bit of heft, a bit of volume and mass, and that can be quite effective, quite dramatic, I think. I think I want to make slightly more of these blocks of cloud in this area. Is it getting really kind of close to the sun? Because I'm going to add some highlights in and around it, which are going to be more dramatic in this area. So I'm going to go back to layer 11, go in with the yellow colour, the 8th colour on the middle row, with the soft brush, low on the 2% size, maybe 20% strength, just in and around this edge. Like I say, as it's getting close to the sun, it deserves to be more dramatic. Tap it in, let it fade out. Maybe there's some areas in here as well. And that's looking quite nice. Maybe this area could actually be more cloud. So we'll go back to layer 4 with the eraser. So the eraser to soft brush, 2% size, maybe 30% strength. I'm just going to chip away at this edge a little bit. Perhaps actually the mountain could come down here and this could be more an edge of cloud. And sometimes cloud and mountain can get a little bit confused in the distance, and sometimes you look at something and think, is that cloud? Is that mountain? I quite like that look. Go back to the top layer, back in with the soft brush, 1% size, 20% strength, and again, just move along here with a slightly more nibbled, highlighted edge along here. And I think that picks up the light quite nicely. Again, just even brighter as it gets close to the sun. Something like that. And I think that's working pretty well. What we could do perhaps is add some rays to the sun. So still with a 1%, let's just put that down so low, 1%, and just rotate it. I want some lines just to be subtly suggested out from that sun. Don't want to make a massive feature of them. Just a hint. It's almost undetectable. So keep rotating it, going from the center of the sun outwards. And we will notice it, but don't want it to be overpowering, look too exaggerated. So you can see it's subtly there. It's not too impactful. Then what I'd like to do is go to the wrench symbol, the add, copy canvas, and paste. Now let's see where it's put it. We're on the top layer, so it's on the very top, which is useful. I'm going to go to the selection, rectangle. I'm going to grab everything below the horizon point from about there, then go to the layer, tap on it, and clear. Now you won't have noticed what we're doing here, but we've got the section at the very top, which is a duplicate of what we've already created. So try that again, transform. I'm going to flip it vertically, and then I'm going to move it further down. I'm going to create a reflection. Now it's not going to be a crystal clear reflection like this, but it's a good thing to start with a reflection anyway. Deselect. Now we've got gaps and anomalies in that. I don't really care about that. We'll go to the transform, stretch it just a little bit to get rid of any little things. Up. We probably need to put it on freeform for that matter though. Pinch it up, out to the side, ever so slightly if need be, and gets rid of some of those gaps. Some of them I'm happy to have remain. Next I'm going to take that layer, drag it all the way down so it's underneath layer 2. And it puts it below a lot of the kind of glow, the mist effects, that we've already got, and just makes it feel like we've got a kind of watery surface already. I'm then going to go to the adjustments, the motion blur, and just to the side, I'm going to blur it maybe to about 30%. Don't worry about the fact it's been revealed there. In fact, that's easy to fix. All we need to do is go to the smudge, medium hard brush, 5% size, 100% opacity, and we can just push that off the edge that way. That isn't really an issue. And we're going to distort this further anyway, so that's not a problem. We're going to go to the top layer, create a new layer, layer 14. I'm going to have some foliage here at the top from closer to trees, and I'm going to trial out the vintage rad brush. Now I've reset it. I'm going to tap on it again. I'm going to change the stroke path spacing to be a little bit more, maybe about 55%. Click done. Going to have it about 20% size, 100% opacity, and we're going to go for one of the colors down here. I'm going to go for the second color on the bottom row, and I'm just going to start tapping in some areas, scribble it in, doesn't really matter. Perhaps I might put that up a little bit more to the 30% size, scribble it in. We're going to get these kind of more angular shapes. I've often used the rainforest brush for details like this, and I will be using it in this tutorial too, but just trying out something that gives us something that's a bit more angular to represent leaves that are a little bit closer to us and more identifiable in their shapes. Tap in a few around those edges. It's okay to have it a little bit denser in places too. Maybe a couple just hanging in this area. So imagine a tree over this side, bringing foliage over this way. Let's go to that layer, slide and duplicate it, and it just makes it stronger, and slide and duplicate it again, and gives it more of a strong silhouette. Pinch them together. You can see that. Then we can continue to go in, fill in any bits that look a little bit too sparse now. Not quite happy with it, just go over it more. And we always have the option at this point, let's just slide and duplicate it again for any weak areas, pinch them together, or tap on the top version, merge down if that's a bit tricky for you. And then on that same layer, we can go to the airbrushing medium hard brush, 2% size, 100% opacity. Now we can go in there and we can, perhaps even lower actually, let's put it down to the lowest part of 2%. And if you want to just continue these shapes, you can do. At the very edges, perhaps you'll get more noticeable leaf shapes that just stick out. So you can change and vary it up quite considerably around these edges. Again, I don't intend this to be something that should take terribly long. I'm all about creating a look of something in the most efficient way that we can during these tutorials, so we can power through, speed through, get to the point where it's looking really quite nice as an effect without having to be hugely labor intensive on every single detail. Having said that, when you get to the edge, maybe you can just more manually put in some of these leaf shapes. And then it's the combination of the rad brush and just kind of sketching in rough shapes with this airbrush. I think the combination can be quite appealing, quite successful. If there's any little areas you're not quite happy with, just review it, inspect it, move around the canvas, change whatever you feel needs changing. Tap on that layer, put on the alpha lock, go to our colours, maybe move along to the fourth colour, go to the soft brush with an airbrushing, 10% size, 20% strength. Maybe we can just soften it in a little bit over here and over here, just so as it gets closer to that kind of sun. It bleaches out just noticeably a little bit, responds to the environment in a nice way. Tap on it, turn off the alpha lock, and then go to the adjustments, the Gaussian blur, and just blur it in slightly, and that will just further soften it in so that it just sits a little bit better, so maybe about 3%. And you can see it's just softened it in. And I think it works better that way. We're going to do something over from this edge. So we'll create a new layer, layer 15. We'll go in with maybe the second color again. This time we'll go to the inking Studio Pen, 40% size, 100% opacity, and we're going to get some branches that just cut in here, and it's pressure sensitive, so release the pressure as you get further along with the branch. Go back and firm up that branch where it started. So I'm cutting down. You choose where you want your branches, how you want it to look. Now I suggest that perhaps you don't do huge amounts of these. It doesn't really require it. You can be suggestive of it. Get a few in there that obviously stand out. And then when we start adding the foliage in, it will you'll lose some of the branch effects anyway. Just get a few in there initially. Maybe just another one in here will do. And we'll stay on the same layer. We're going to go to the organic snow gum brush. I'm going to reset it. Go back to it, tap on it, change the spacing from 6 to about 15%. Go to the color dynamics, turn the hue down, move all of these down to none in fact. And now when we do it, we get a good spacing and they're all a kind of flat color. They don't undulate or they don't change hue or darkness or anything like that, which is really useful. Put it down to 3% size, 100% opacity. Now we're probably going to create a different layer for the foliage itself. So layer 16. And then you can just start to apply this. Just really go to town with this really. And it's a different kind of texture than the other one, further away. We just want to create this in kind of clumps, clusters. Some bits are going to really overlap and shut out the light in the background in areas. It's pressure sensitive, so the harder you press, the bigger the leaves. And you can start to see the impact, and that's why I didn't really want to do too many branches because they kind of get lost in the mix anyway. I'm going to turn it down 2%, zoom in, start to be a little bit more specific over here. Just do it as a series of kind of blobs. I'm pressing on quite hard. Maybe at this upper edge it condenses together a little bit more. And in addition to that, we could also use the rainforest brush, tap on the rainforest brush, put the spacing within the stroke path up to 45%, click done, 2% size, in fact a bit higher on the 2%, 100% opacity, and we can use that in conjunction with that other brush. Now there's nothing to say we can only use one type of texture and one brush at a time. There's every reason to think actually it's a good idea to use textures in conjunction with each other. I think that the rainforest brush on its own can be a little bit soft and not granular enough, so use it perhaps with a snow gum brush and the two effects together can be quite good. Now on that whole layer, perhaps we can go to the adjustments, the motion blur, and just slightly to the side, not very much, maybe only 5%, and deselect, and it's just softened it slightly. Perhaps we can go to that layer, tap on the N and just turn the opacity down. Let's move it so we can see it. Move it down from 100 just to about 95 so we can see the branches a little bit more clearly than we can the foliage. I think that works pretty well. Now if we're not happy with bits of the foliage, then obviously we can go in with the eraser, set the eraser to the organic, maybe the rainforest brush, put it to an appropriate size, 2%, 100% opacity, and if any areas now of the foliage where we think it's gone too far, we can just remove as much as we want. Just pare it back a little bit. And then we can find the right balance. I'm going to leave that tree like that. I'm going to go to my layers, create a new layer, layer 17. I'm going to go to the first color on the bottom row. I'm going to go in with that rainforest brush, same settings, but I'm going to put it pretty big, 7% size, 100% opacity, and just in this lower section now, I want to build in some foreground. Slightly raised at the sides, a bit bulkier here, for example, and also here, not too much. Turn it down 3%, just a little bit more raised up in this section. Same in here. Allow for a few things just sticking out on either side. A bit more second colour. Vary up some of these textures here in the foreground. Down here in the shadows, we don't want it to be completely flat. Tap a few more of this green in. Go to the third colour. Same again, vary it up. Fourth colour. As we get more into this kind of centre area, over here, we're probably going to have more of this kind of green featuring. On the edges, some slightly darker colours. I'm going to go to my layers and create a new layer, layer 18. It might be a point to start condensing some of these layers, perhaps. So we could go to some of these distant mountain layers, layers 4 to 9, and I'm going to pinch them together. It's going to mess up the numbers a little bit later on, but I'm not too worried about that. So all of the mountain layers now are on layer 4. Got a new layer up there, layer 18, it's at the very top. I'm going to go in with the inking dry ink. I'm going to go to the 5th colour on the bottom row, 5% size, 50% strength. And I'm just going to start introducing some grasses and other things in the texture in this area. So pretty much all along the kind of water's edge, we're going to have this kind of a texture. We can go in, and even on those individuals, we can have them splintering off into more kind of detail. We put it up slightly, 7%, a bit bolder. And then in this kind of lower area, perhaps we need more of a highlight, and go along to the 6th colour. Notice some different kind of greens coming through, just a real mixture of kind of grasses and other details. We'll come back to that, but we're going to move forward with some of the more prominent features. We're going to have a bench in here now. So I'm going to create a new layer, layer 14 now, which is a little bit confusing, but it is the top layer anyway, so don't worry about it. All your layers, as long as you followed the same process as me, will be named to the same number, so don't worry about that. So we're at the top layer, which is layer 14, and I'm going to go in with the 7th colour on the bottom row, and I'm going to go in with the selection, draw a long rectangle, like so, drag from that colour into the rectangle, and deselect. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to go on freeform, and just from the bottom corner, just pinch it in slightly, and it really doesn't want to be too exaggerated. Deselect, and that is probably too much. So from the bottom corner, better if you zoom in really, pull it out so it's just ever so subtly angled rather. I'm going to try again. Really quite subtle, much more subtle. I'm going to take that layer, slide and duplicate it, transform and flip it vertically, move it up, and I'll just move it out of the way initially. I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to use the 8th color, drag it into the new shape, transform, and it's probably better if we put it underneath the first one. So put it underneath the first layer 14, and I want to just kind of match it up on either side. Deselect. You're only going to be able to tell this by just a little bit trial and error. I want to match it up here so it lines up with it. Match it up here on the edge so it lines up with it, and then transform again, freeform, just squash it down so it's quite a bit narrower, like so. And if we have any little bits that stick out the edge, we'll just go in with the eraser. It doesn't matter what. Maybe the airbrushing, medium hard brush, 100% opacity and small. Just fix any little anomalies at the edge. I've perhaps done too much there, it doesn't matter too much. Back in with the medium hard brush, 100% opacity, 1% size, just marry them up. Okay, I'm going to condense those two layers together. So pinch them together, layer 14, and then slide and duplicate that layer. Now the bottom version this time of layer 14, transform, move it underneath. And I want to be able to just reveal it a little bit so you can see that paler color coming through. But I'm also going to pinch it in ever so slightly from the side and from that side. Now the trick of this is that this top corner should line up roughly with that one. Check that's happening on both sides. Yep, as long as it's roughly about right. Doesn't need to be super precise, as long as it is kind of in the region of. And then the bottom version will slide and duplicate again, and we can vary this up a little bit so it's not completely regular. Pinching in from the side, getting a little bit shorter, and then we can space these apart a little bit, so play around with them so you're kind of getting the positioning. Zoom out. And I'm going to take one of the versions, slide and duplicate it again, bottom version, transform, rotate it 45, and again freeform, just squash it further down, move it up, and we're going to use this as another part of the bench in the right position. In fact, we'll put that above. We'll put it above the others, like so. Slide and duplicate it, transform, flip it horizontal, and then we'll move it across to the other side of the bench. Slide and duplicate it again, and I'm just going to put it, and it's going to have to be changed, but just as an efficient way of doing this. So put it on freeform, move it to the center, maybe narrow it up a little bit, put it in the center there enough. That'll do. We're just constructing it first, and then we can fine tune it. Then I'm going to take one of the longer pieces again, doesn't matter which, duplicate it, transform, move it down to the seating area of the bench. Just going to zoom in so you can see. On the bottom corner, move it further down. I'm actually going to pinch it up so make it more narrow. Move it further down. Again, pinch it in. It becomes roughly the same width as that piece. Deselect. Slide and duplicate it again. Move it up. Pinch it in. Move it up. Okay. Right, I'm going to slide and duplicate one of the layers, 14. I'm going to put it at the very top, just to preserve it. But all the other layer 14s I'm going to pinch together. Now we've got them as one bench. And if we need that one just as a spare, then we've got it. So untick that so it's invisible. Go back to the layer 14 that is visible. And we're just going to fine tune things. I'm going to have to put on the alpha lock. And I'm going to go in with the 7th color and something appropriate. So maybe the medium hard brush, 2% size, 100% opacity. And I just need to fill in this crossbeam. That should all be dark. You just want to keep it as neat as possible to that beam. And just fade it out when it gets to this bit at the bottom. We'll do the same over here. Just neat on that bit, neat along that edge here, neat along there. As it gets down to here, just allow it to fade out a little bit. And that's starting to work, pull together a little bit more. I'll turn the opacity of that down to maybe 20%. Just go over that whole area at the top. Perhaps that blue is a little bit too obviously different, too light. So we can just go in there and just subdue it. And we've got very kind of harsh geometric shapes really at this point, and we're going to soften them in, but just initially it was quite useful to have them as very precise forms. So that whole bench, I'm going to go tap on the alpha lock, turn it off, adjustments, Gaussian blur. I'm going to blur it in just slightly, 2%, deselect, go back to it, put back on the alpha lock. Now we can work a little bit more freely without worrying about damaging it too much. So we have a section here where we're going to go in with perhaps the 9th color and the medium hard brush, 1% size, 20% strength. We're just going to move into this area, and we can do it freehand. I don't want this bench to be absolutely hard edged. I think, you know, it's going to be weathered. It's going to be a little bit more wobbly in places. I think the way we've got it at the minute is a little bit too hard edged. So starting to add elements that are more sketched in is fine. So we want to keep that section dark. We're going to do the same on the other side. Just bring it down from here, across here, scribble it in a little bit. We do want to restate the separation in a moment, but not just yet. Down, down, and then maybe from this point to that point, just because it's a long line, we'll do a line and hold it so it snaps. And then we can go about filling it in, maybe a little bit stronger, maybe put it up to 30%. Fill it in. Don't care if it's a bit uneven. We're going to go over it with lighter colors as well. Down a bit more, down to the 20%. Just fill that in a little bit. Then we're going to switch back to the 7th color, 100% opacity, and we're just going to do a line across from here. Should have zoomed out really. Let's try that again. From here all the way across, like so. I'll turn off the alpha lock on the bench. Maybe there's just another section that juts forward here because we need other sections that support the bench to jut forward for the seat, something like that. It's pretty rough at this stage. We'll come back to the bench a little bit more refined. We need to do the water. The water is going to be largely what sells this image. So let's just concentrate on that. We'll go to the top layer, create a new layer on top, layer 16. It is also another layer 16, but it is the one at the top, so don't worry about that. In fact, we could rename it, couldn't we? We could rename to water. I'm going to go to the 7th color. I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, just lowest part of 2% size, 10% opacity, and I'm going to do a line across, hold it, we do it again, do it a few times. I want a kind of low-lying mist in this area, build it up. That can work quite nicely to begin with, just to give a sense of the water's surface. Then we can build lines across. Over from this side, you can do it kind of freehand. It's quite easy to do. Quite a subtle impact anyway. Build it across initially. Some lines. That's already starting to build in a slight impression of the surface of the water. Probably might go back to the... I'm perhaps going to put this layer actually underneath the bench layer. I think it's going to be important that I do that. And probably underneath all of the other layers apart from the sky. So it goes underneath layer 14 down here. The water is now all the way down there. I'm going to go in with the 4th color on the middle row. I'm going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 4% size, 10% strength, and just build in some of this color all the way across. I want some more of this blue in our scene, all the way from edge to edge a little bit more. I'm going to go for the 5th color, and this is going to represent some of these shapes coming down. So again, just turn it down, 1% size, maybe 20% strength. We can build in some of these lines. You can see it's building down that. You don't have to do too many of them. Try and keep them horizontal as much as possible. As they come further down, these shapes are going to become more kind of fragmented, start to split apart. Try and follow almost like a line that you don't quite see, doesn't quite join up, but that it gives the sense of a ripple moving across. A couple of lines here, and it's quite rough really at that stage, and that's not too much of a problem. I'm going to move to the 6th color, still on the same brush, soft brush, maybe 2% size, 20% strength, and then in conjunction with those other bands, we're also going to have lighter ones that cut across. And if you want to hold it until it snaps, you can try doing that as well. It's underneath the greenery, so I don't need to respect that, I don't need to worry about that. Do it all the way across, do some lines. You're starting to get this sense of ripples in the water. Go for the 7th color, turn it down 1%, in fact no, just the lowest part of 2%, maybe 30% strength. I'm just going to really pick up on some of these, make them a bit stronger. Do some on the in-between as well. Don't all have to be solid lines. They can go in sections. You can have a line and then a break, and then it carries on. It becomes more fragmented, and that works quite nicely. We obviously want to keep some of the lighter colors in the center area rather than the edges. Not completely true, because we're going to get some sky here that is reflected, but we're going to keep some of the brighter colors there in the center. And just keep moving it in sweeps across. Does require a little bit of a steady hand. Just allow it to glide across, create some fragmenting. Maybe a bit more of it in the center area. We can start to fill in some of this warmer glow a little bit. Now, there's a real kind of way of making this pop a little bit more. We can go to our layers, stay on that same layer, create a new layer. So this is layer 17, but it's down here. We'll perhaps change the name of it, rename, water, light, change the blend mode, tap on the end, scroll down to add. We're going to go in with the luminance light pen. We're going to go in with the yellow color, the 8th color, really catching the light. So we're going to put it at 20% size, 30% strength. Think about where the sun is, and directly underneath that, we're just going to do some tap on it, build in a section. Perhaps with the opacity is a little bit stronger than that. Let's put it down to 20. Have some separation, tap it in a few times, some separation. And then it can just be a section where the bench is there, a little bit up here. We definitely want the sun kind of, reflected in the water. If it's a little bit off, well, you can go to the transform, just try and get it so it's directly below the sun. Like that. Go to the orange, and we can just further extend some of that effect across into a slightly broader. I'm going to put the water light above the bench actually now. I think it makes sense because I'm going to add some more glow. I'm going to go in with the orange, and I'm also going to go in with the soft brush with an airbrushing, 10% size, 2% strength. Just tap it in a few times here. Again, that glow is just going to ramp up, and it's going to cut in front of that bench a little bit. Let's just turn it down 5%. Just focus it in the center there. And I think that helps quite dramatically. I like that. I'm going to turn it down 2%. Bring it into this top area a little bit more. Extend that glow up here across our scene. I think that's working better. I'm also going to go for the bench now that we're on a layer above. We can actually add some of this glow to the seat. Go over a little bit on this seat. Makes sense if that glow's impacting on that surface. Maybe go back to the bench with the last colour on the bottom row. Turn it down a little bit, 1%, 10% strength. And when still on the soft brush, you can just ramp that up. The highlights along the bench. That works nicely. I'm going to go back to layer 17. In fact, layer 18, because I had some of the grass on there. And we're going to work on this ground. So we're going to go in with the airbrushing medium brush. Going to use the 7th colour, 4% size, maybe 70% strength, and just build in this ground, make it a bit firmer. We've got something for the bench to actually sit on. It doesn't make sense otherwise. Then we can go in with the charcoal burnt tree, go to a slightly lighter colour, so the 8th colour, 5% size, 20% strength. And just in and around this area on the ground, we can have some more textures coming in. Maybe turn it up 15% or so. Allow some of this texture to build in more. This bottom area. Move along to maybe the 9th colour. Turn the size of that brush down 3%, 40% strength. Just build in some highlights underneath the bench. A little bit anyway, not too much. Either side. Go to the lightest colour, maybe go in with the airbrushing medium brush, 1% size, 50% strength. Maybe just some, in fact that's too strong, let's put it down to 20% strength. Just some suggestions of stones, things here in the foreground. Don't need to do overly many of these, just a few. Just pepper them in there a little bit. Go in there with the inking, dry ink, and some of the colours. We'll go for the 5th colour. I quite like that colour, so let's put it up really quite strong, 90%, and maybe the 5% size still. And we can just start to have some of that grass and other things coming in there, and it's underneath the bench and in and amongst it, so don't need to worry about that. Some shorter ones down here. Just continue to add as much of this as you feel you want to, and really create the effect that you feel happiest with. I do encourage people to spend longer on this. I will be extending this over at my Patreon. I tend to do extended versions of these tutorials over after the main tutorial. So if that's something you're interested in, then you can go and check it out there. And I'll just go to the organic rainforest brush, go to the vibrant green, and what settings are we on? 2% size, 70% strength. Just a bit of this, peppered in, not too much, just here and there. And I think I'll leave this tutorial here at this point. I hope you've enjoyed following along. Please do hit subscribe, it really helps out the channel, and I hope to catch you back here soon. Bye for now.